I have a few points I want to make to seed the discussion that I hope will happen afterwards. First of all, the work behind what has been published in the book does not claim to describe all Americans. For instance, even in the academic world, the business schools are very pro-India. The business schools, which is a new phenomenon in the last 10 years, since the investment climate in India is doing well, and corporate America is very pro-India. So what they're teaching in the MBAs is very much a story favorable to India. The book talks about another department or another collection of departments which are social sciences and humanities. This includes South Asian studies, religious studies, history, anthropology, those kind of things, which are following the same trend as they did, as if nothing has happened in the last 10 years to change them. They're still the old guard since the Cold War, that type of attitude towards India. So we have to differentiate between what is being criticized and the rest of America. Also, a lot of popular culture in America is very pro-Indian culture, religion, symbols, yoga, meditation, all these kinds of things. So the group of people that are focused on the study of India in the United States is roughly about 2,000. There's 2,000 professionals, full-time, career, India studies. And they are in these different departments. And this number is increasing rapidly because people are being added into business schools and think tanks and so on, because India is important to study. So at this rate, this number will probably double in the next few years. Now, I have, for the last 10 years, used my business experience and professional experience to study these 2,000 people as an industry. So this is what I want to mention. I think particularly Ajit on the panel will relate to that, because as a business person, you first look at an industry you're operating in. You cannot take isolated individuals. And when you look at an industry, you look at who are the producers, who are the distributors, who are the retailers. So I figured that the classrooms are retailers of India knowledge. The media are retailers. They're not producing the research themselves, and so forth. The producers of knowledge are in higher education. They are in places like Harvard and Chicago and places like that. They are the advanced scholars. And so I wanted to study the industry producers of knowledge, and also look at the distribution channels to see if these distribution channels are controlled by a few guardians who only let certain products through. Like in Walmart in America, if they have more than 50% market share of shoes or clothes, no matter what you produce, if Walmart won't carry it, you will not be as successful as your competitor who got into Walmart. So the control of distribution channels can control who gets to produce. You can produce all the knowledge you want. Ajit ji is right, we can produce all kinds of knowledge you want. But if you cannot get it through the journals, it is not legitimate knowledge. If you cannot get it into the school books, it is not legitimate knowledge. If you cannot get it into Encyclopedia and Carta and Britannica, it is not going to enjoy the market share. Market share in retailing is controlled by distribution channels and not by the ability to produce. I can write all the books I want, but it can simply be ignored. So we must as people who have competence in managing industries, look at this as a knowledge industry, systematically and scientifically, understand where are the bottlenecks and who controls those bottlenecks, so we don't spend our resources producing knowledge which will never get distributed. So if you look at the industry model of knowledge production of India, the knowledge production of India it used to be during the colonial times in Britain, colonial Indology, and since independence it has shifted to United States in South Asian studies. That is where the knowledge production of India is happening. And this knowledge then gets franchised. I'm talking about social sciences knowledge, social sciences and humanities knowledge. This knowledge gets franchised to the Indian university system. So the Indian university systems use theories about Weber or Marx or whatever kind of theories are in fashion. And the reason they have to use Western theories rather than India-centric theories is because that's where the grants come from. That's what legitimizes the scholar. The scholar is in a hurry to go to the US, get a visa, get their article published somewhere, become a visiting professor, be a co-author with somebody with that kind of a reputation. And that's what builds their status even in India. So even the problem in India is driven by the kind of framing which is being done in the United States. It is not separately possible to go solve the India problem, because the heavy funding, like Ford Foundation funding, like Rockefeller Foundation funding, like all these different grants that are coming, and this is increasing, by the way, that is too large to be ignored. So a lot of Indian scholars are sucked in by the carrots that they are offered. Now, to understand the institutional mechanism that creates India studies, I want to invite you to follow me on a hypothetical example. I want to give you a kind of a thought experiment, and so please follow that thought experiment. Imagine if India were to do what United States is doing. So then we will see how it will work. So let's replicate what the structure of the industry is in the United States to study other cultures. And let's imagine that Indians set up the same thing. Suppose we were to have the same thing. Then, the starting point of all this was the private foundations. The first big private foundation was the Carnegie Foundation, then the Rockefeller Foundation, then the Ford Foundation. These are multi-billion-dollar foundations each, and there's a couple of hundreds of them. Top 25, 30 are very, very powerful. So the first thing you would have to do in India is to set up an Ambani Foundation, and a Narayan Murthy Foundation, and a Birla Foundation, and a Mahindra Foundation, and a Tata's Foundation, focusing on not clean water and education and basic stuff, but on the pursuit of Indian civilization as their primary goal. Because these American foundations were set up to promote the American manifest destiny, to promote a certain sense of American history, the very explicit terms in the Carnegie Foundation documents, founding documents, and Rockefeller Foundation said that we have to create a certain idea of our history and teach it in our school systems to create that sense of superiority, the sense of manhood, the sense of supremacy over the world. So these private foundations were set up to influence Americans at home and also the rest of the world abroad. So this is the first thing. Imagine if we had such foundations in India run by Indian industrialists. So that's the first thing. Second part is these private foundations in the United States work very closely with the State Department. The senior people go back and forth. The Ford Foundation guy may have been formerly head of the FBI and vice versa. Some State Department people go and work for Carnegie Endowment, and somebody from Rockefeller gets into the State Department. There's movement back and forth ideologically. So this equivalent thing would be that the Ministry of External Affairs and these different private foundations have a long-term alliance to promote India and Indian thought all over the region. And the further extension would be that Ambani Foundation sets up a shop in Islamabad, and Mahindra Foundation sets up a foundation in Lahore, and another one sets up in Nepal, and another one sets up in Sri Lanka. And what are they doing? They are taking the cream of the Pakistani youth and giving them grants to study human rights violations in Pakistan. The one in Lahore is studying women's rights in Pakistan, and the one in Rawalpindi is studying various castes and tribes that are fighting each other to figure out how we can intervene, who can be on our side, who can be co-opted to fight the other guy. And another foundation is giving grants to, Indian foundation I'm talking about, in this hypothetical scenario, let's say, is giving grants to find out all the political parties and keeping them and looking at the religion and so on. Now, if there were this axis between the Indian government and private foundations, and they were camped out for the last 50 years, and they had taken the cream of the thinkers, the youth, the liberal thinkers in those colleges, and Indianized them in their mindset, then you would have a situation similar to what the foreign institutions have done to the intellectuals in India. So the axis of private foundations and government in the United States fund the academy as knowledge workers who are being outsourced, who are for hire. They are contractors. They are out looking for grants. Their prestige depends on how many grants they've got. Their ability to travel and do research and hire other people and get photographs or do this or that, whatever they need for their research, depends on funding and their grants. So the funding sources are these. the foundations, the think tanks, and the government. And the scholars are hired guns. They go and perform. It is at one level, there's a lot of individualism and free thinking. That is true. And Ajit is absolutely right. There is a lot of free thinking. But at another level, there is institutional mechanisms of funding and reward giving. And these institutional mechanisms do have an agenda. Americans are a very rational, objective, and fair people. But they're also a very competitive people. A very brutally competitive people. And competition means you have a point of view, you have an agenda, you have a vested interest, and you are, while you are very objective as a businessman, but you're also competitive as a businessman, so your objectivity is being utilized to further your particular point of view and your market share over competing brands. That is how America functions. So we do not want to think that because of objectivity, fairness, and all that, therefore they don't have a particular point of view that they are trying to push. They are certainly trying to push a point of view, and they have institutional mechanisms for the past 75 years in place to feed these points of view through the academic system. And this output of India studies, which is managed by these different funding mechanisms, it then goes into the general public beyond the 2000. It goes to writers, it goes to the education system and feeds the textbooks, it goes to filmmakers, it goes to government policymakers. So the reason these 2,000 people out of 300 million Americans are important is because they have a very large leverage over the thinking of the rest of society. And the Indian social sciences and humanities have lost any originality. The models and theories are imported, and that's what the social scientists in India are trained to learn and prove that they are competent in it. And the final yardstick is that somebody overseas has endorsed them and said that you're okay. Otherwise, they're not considered good enough. America is a land of ethnicities, and all ethnicities have the right to compete on a level playing field, but no one else will do it for you. You have to do it for yourself. So while Americans are very fair and very objective, they require that part of the meritocracy is that the Indians have to get organized and do this for themselves, not that sit there and expect someone else will do it for you. So this is very much the American way. Now, this is also good for America, this type of criticism, because it will put American foreign policy towards India on a positive course. America currently has a schizophrenia with respect to India. On the one hand, we have the government and business policy, which is very positive. On the other hand, you have the social sciences and humanities, which treats India as the world's worst nightmare of human rights problems and looks at it through that angle and looks at it as an opportunity for US intervention to fix India. The other reason why this kind of a study is legitimate and important is that there are stakeholders in India studies. It's not only the professors who are stakeholders in India studies, it's also students, like my kids who go to college. And the average tuition is $40,000 to $50,000 a year. And in America, consumers have rights. So as consumers of education, the students and their parents who are paying the bill have the right to go and criticize and say this is not legitimate knowledge. That is very much the American way. The non-Indian students who are being taught nonsensical things about India are being, it's a disservice to them, because imagine a student who learns all this stuff about Ganesh and so on, and then he goes and gets a job with some multinational and comes and lives in Bangalore, and he starts thinking that way about the Indians he meets with. He's not going to be very successful. Whereas if they were to teach the next generation of Americans respect for India and treating India seriously, it would be good for America's foreign interests. So what I'm saying is actually good for American foreign interests. The Indians are also being approached as donors. There's a $25 million campaign by Harvard to raise money, and similarly by various universities, and they're targeting Indians to donate money for India Studies chairs. And as we know, when a promoter wants you to invest, you have a right to cross-examine and do your due diligence. So it is very much the American way to criticize India Studies when we are being approached to fund them. And finally, we are the community being profiled by the India Studies. It's about us that they're talking about when they're saying these things. And as the community being profiled, we have a right to talk back. So these are the reasons I'm giving why this is not anything anti-American. Finally, I want to conclude by saying that if you're a gardener, you can plant all the roses and all the flowers you want, but if you don't pluck out the weeds, your garden will die. You cannot be a gardener and just say, I only do positive things, I don't worry about negative things. Similarly, if you're in healthcare, if the person already has a disease that needs the pus to be removed, or chemotherapy, or radiation therapy, or surgery, you cannot just say, I just give you vitamins, and you keep doing positive things and you will be fine. There is a requirement to have the intervention to address critically to address problems. You cannot just do positive things which then get ignored by the distribution channels and not make a difference. You have to intervene, and that in fact is also the message of the Gita. You have to take action. Thank you.